Today, we're jumping into the near future to break down a potential turning point in the Ukraine war. There's a huge 20-point peace plan on the table, but as you're about to see, it's always that last 10% of any deal where the real fight happens. So, just imagine this headline flashing across your screen in late 2025. And yeah, that's not just some clickbait headline. It's a flat-out ultimatum. It's this final, super high-pressure chance to make a deal before the entire map of the conflict could be redrawn. So let's get into it. What's actually in this deal? We're going to break down its 3 core pillars, see where the US and Europe are clashing, and then ask the biggest question of all. Does any of this diplomatic talk actually line up with the reality on the ground? The whole story really comes to a head right here at Mar-a-Lago. But believe me, this is no relaxed weekend golf trip. We're talking about a tense, last-ditch summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. And it's the climax of months of really bruising negotiations. And get this, the pressure wasn't just in the negotiating room. As Trump and Zelensky were getting ready to meet, Kyiv was being pounded by this absolutely massive aerial assault. In Zelensky's own words, it was Russia's answer to our peace efforts, a pretty violent reminder that this war doesn't just pause for diplomacy. So what were they actually hashing out? Well, the core of it is this 20-point framework. Publicly, both sides were saying they were about 90% of the way there, but that final 10%, that's where the devil, as they say, is really in the details. And that's where all the controversy is hiding. So let's break down the plan's 3 main pillars. So first up, security. And this is, Ukraine's #1 concern. The deal offers this strong NATO-like protection to try and stop any future aggression. But, and this is really crucial, it stops short of giving them full NATO membership. That's a major concession designed to address one of Russia's long-standing demands. And this brings us to a really key idea, Article 5-style protection. So what on earth does that mean? Well, think of it like NATO's core promise. An attack on one is an attack on all, but kind of unbundled from actual NATO membership. It's a creative diplomatic workaround for sure, but it's also completely untested in the real world. Okay, pillar number 2, territory. And this right here is the biggest hurdle. Both sides are calling the future of the Donbas region a thorny issue. Now, Ukraine has proposed holding a national referendum during a 60 or 90-day ceasefire to let the Ukrainian people decide. The Kremlin, however, has pretty much dismissed that idea, basically calling it a tactic to just prolong the conflict. And this third pillar, wow. This is where you really see just how transactional this whole deal is. It's all about the economics, tying Ukraine's reconstruction directly to its most valuable assets. We're talking about a plan where future money from rare earth minerals would fund the rebuilding, and even splitting the power generated by the massive Zaporizhia nuclear plant. It's peace, but it definitely comes with a price tag. Okay, so we've covered the 90% they supposedly agree on, but that last 10%, that's where things get really messy and where the fractures start to show. And not just between Ukraine and Russia, but actually between the United States and its key European allies who've come up with their own counterproposal. And this is where you can really see the alliance start to fray. Just look at the key differences here. The US plan has Ukraine actually ceding land, while Europe says, no, let's start talks from the current battle lines. Europe also wants a larger Ukrainian army. But the biggest fight is over the money. The US plan, which has a very America First kind of feel, creates this new investment fund from frozen Russian assets, with the US taking half the profits. Europe, on the other hand, is saying not a single penny should be touched until Russia pays reparations. Those are 2 very, very different visions for post-war justice. All right, so that's the high-level diplomacy. But what's actually happening on the battlefield? Because this is where the grand plans can really crash into a much, much harsher reality. And right on cue, almost like it was scripted, just as the summit was starting, the Kremlin started broadcasting these claims of a major victory. The announcement was incredibly bold. Their forces had completely captured the key city of Minorgrad. But when independent analysts at the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, actually looked at the evidence, the whole story just fell apart. They used geolocated footage and satellite data and found Russian troops in less than half the city. The claim of a total seizure, it just wasn't true. You see, this isn't just a mistake or an exaggeration. It's a very deliberate strategy. It's a sophisticated form of what's called cognitive warfare. Russia puts out these high-quality videos of small teams raising flags in different places to create the illusion of a total capture, all to try and demoralize Ukraine and influence the negotiator. So here's the bottom line, the real kicker. Despite all the propaganda, the reality on the ground is a slow, grinding war. ISW calculates that at the current pace of fighting, it would take Russia until April 2029, that's over 3 more years, just to capture the 4 Ukrainian regions it already claims to control. So, after all of that, the pressure, the competing plans, the disinformation on the battlefield, where does this all go? Is a deal actually even possible? Well, believe it or not, despite all the obstacles, they did leave the summit with a plan. And it's a pretty aggressive one. The idea is for working groups from the US, Ukraine, and Russia to basically lock themselves in a room in January 2026 and not come out until those final details are hammered out. If they actually succeed, it all leads to a final signing ceremony in Washington. And that leaves us, really, with the biggest question of all. Even if they somehow manage to bridge that final 10%, does this deal represent a true framework for a lasting peace? Or, given all the deep mistrust and the huge disconnect between the diplomacy and the reality, is it just setting the stage for a temporary pause in a much longer conflict?